You think you're actually going to operate that thing. The Reaper MQ-7 isn't for data nerds. Colonel Harrison burst out laughing across the command center. As a young woman approached the base's most classified drone control station, she didn't respond, just placed her security badge on the scanner. In complete silence. When the mission status board updated 12 hours later, showing conflict terminated, a 4-star general was waiting. He stepped forward, removed his cap, and saluted. "Greetings, Major Reeves, the analyst who just ended a 20-year war. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you." Lieutenant Commander Elena Reeves was 31 years old, half Korean, and completely invisible to everyone who controlled the future of warfare. She'd graduated magna cum laude from MIT with dual degrees in applied mathematics and computer science, scored the highest marks in military intelligence training history, and possessed an analytical mind that could process battlefield data faster than most supercomputers. Her threat assessment algorithms had predicted enemy movements with 97.3% accuracy over the past 4 years. Her tactical analysis reports had saved countless lives by identifying ambush patterns, supply route vulnerabilities, and command structure weaknesses that field commanders missed entirely. But here at Fort Meridian in Nevada, the military's most advanced drone warfare facility, she was just the spreadsheet girl who thinks she understands real combat. The MQ-7 Reaper drones were the absolute pinnacle of military technology. Sleek titanium bodies housing precision-guided munitions, satellite communication arrays capable of receiving orders from anywhere on Earth, and artificial intelligence systems that cost more than most countries' defense budgets. These machines were the future of warfare, capable of surgical strikes that could eliminate high-value targets with zero collateral damage. Only 23 drone pilots in the entire United States military were authorized to operate them. Each one had been hand-selected from combat aviation backgrounds. Each one had logged thousands of flight hours in hostile territory. Each one had proven themselves in live combat situations, where split-second decisions meant the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. All 23 were men. Elena spent her days in the analytics wing, 3 floors below the actual drone control center, surrounded by monitors displaying troop movements, weather patterns, and intelligence feeds from conflict zones around the world. Her uniform never had the adrenaline-soaked sweat stains of the pilots upstairs. Her hands never trembled from the weight of launching missiles that would end lives thousands of miles away. She processed data, generated reports, and provided support intelligence to the real warriors who made the actual decisions. The other officers had a nickname for her: better at counting than killing. They'd say it just loud enough for her to hear when she walked past the pilot briefing rooms. They'd snicker when she submitted threat assessments that contradicted their field experience. They'd make jokes about keyboard warriors who think they understand warfare from behind a desk. They had absolutely no idea what they were talking about. 5 years ago, Elena's brother, Captain David Reeves, had been killed in what the official report called an intelligence failure during a high-priority elimination mission. Bad satellite imagery, outdated enemy positions, faulty communication protocols. David had been the youngest drone pilot ever certified for the MQ-7 program, a tactical genius who could thread missiles through windows from 30,000 feet. He'd followed targeting coordinates provided by the very intelligence analysts who now worked alongside Elena at Fort Meridian. The coordinates had been wrong. David's drone had struck a civilian hospital instead of an enemy command post. 43 innocent people died, including 12 children. David had requested immediate mission abort when he realized the targeting error, but command protocols required confirmation from multiple sources. By the time the mistake was discovered, International news crews were broadcasting footage of burning medical equipment and crying families. 2 weeks later, David was dead. The official cause was listed as training accident during routine maintenance operations, but Elena knew better. Her brother had been consumed by guilt over those civilian casualties. The military had quietly transferred him to a remote facility in Alaska, effectively ending his career. Elena's security clearance had been mysteriously downgraded after that incident. Not because she lacked analytical skills, not because she'd made any mistakes, but because military bureaucracy views family tragedy as a potential liability. She'd been relegated to support roles before she'd ever been given the chance to prove what she could really do. This Thursday morning in March started exactly like every other morning for the past 5 years. Intelligence briefings on 3 active conflict zones. Satellite imagery analysis for ongoing operations. Pattern recognition algorithms running through terabytes of enemy communications. The usual invisibility that came with being support staff. Instead of operational personnel, Elena's workstation was equipped with 6 monitors, displaying real-time intelligence feeds from Operation Desert Thunder, the military's largest drone campaign in 2 decades. For 20 years, coalition forces had been locked in a brutal conflict with the Revolutionary Armed Coalition, a terrorist organization that had destabilized an entire region through coordinated attacks on civilian infrastructure. The enemy had proven remarkably adaptive, changing tactics every time military forces thought they'd found a weakness. But Elena had been tracking something different. Hidden in the massive datasets that most analysts treated as background noise, she'd identified a pattern that everyone else had missed. The enemy wasn't just adapting to military tactics. They were following a mathematical progression that revealed their entire command structure. Over the past 18 months, Elena had mapped every communication intercept, every supply movement, every tactical decision made by Revolutionary Armed Coalition forces. What emerged was a predictive model that could anticipate enemy actions with unprecedented accuracy. She discovered that their apparently random attacks followed a complex algorithm based on resource availability, weather patterns, and psychological warfare principles. More importantly, she'd identified the exact location of their supreme commander, Viktor Kozlov, a man who'd eluded capture for 15 years. Despite being the world's most wanted terrorist, Elena had submitted her findings through proper channels 6 months ago. The report had been classified, reviewed by multiple intelligence committees, and ultimately dismissed as theoretical analysis lacking operational validation. The decision-makers wanted actionable intelligence from proven sources, not mathematical models from a support analyst who'd never seen actual combat. But today was different. Today, Elena was about to prove that sometimes the most dangerous weapon isn't the one firing missiles. It's the mind that knows exactly where to aim them. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The MQ-7 Reaper drone program represented the absolute pinnacle of military exclusivity. Located on the 7th floor of Fort Meridian's command tower, the drone control center was a fortress within a fortress. Triple encrypted. Security doors. Biometric scanners that read palm prints, retinal patterns, and voice recognition simultaneously. Armed guards who checked credentials every 12 hours without exception. The kind of security that protected nuclear launch codes. Inside, 23 individual control stations lined the walls like a high-tech cathedral. Each station commanded a single MQ-7 Reaper drone worth $47 million. The consoles themselves were works of art, curved titanium surfaces housing holographic displays, haptic feedback controls that transmitted the sensation of flight through fiber optic cables, and communication systems that could coordinate strikes across 6 different time zones simultaneously. The selection process for MQ-7 pilots was legendary throughout the military. Candidates needed a minimum of 2,000 combat flight hours in hostile territory. They required security clearances that took 18 months to obtain and involved background investigations extending to childhood teachers and college roommates. Physical fitness standards that exceeded those of Navy SEALs. Psychological evaluations that eliminated anyone showing even microscopic signs of hesitation under pressure. But the most exclusive requirement was the unwritten one. You had to be a member of the Brotherhood. Colonel James Harrison commanded the MQ-7 program with the authority of someone who'd personally shaped its culture. At 54, he was a decorated combat veteran who'd flown at 10 Warthogs over enemy territory for 12 years before transitioning to drone operations. His philosophy was simple. Real warfare requires real warriors, not computer scientists playing video games. Harrison had handpicked each of the 23 pilots based on a criteria that went far beyond official qualifications. They were fighter pilots who'd engaged enemy aircraft in dogfights, attack helicopter pilots who'd conducted close air support, missions under enemy fire, bomber pilots who delivered ordnance to targets defended by surface-to-air missile systems. Every single one had looked death in the eye and pressed the trigger. Anyway, the pilots themselves formed an elite fraternity that existed separate from the rest of Fort Meridian's personnel. They ate together in a private dining facility. They lived in upgraded quarters with amenities unavailable to support staff. They wore distinctive flight suits with patches indicating their combat experience, deployment history, and confirmed kills. During off-duty hours, they gathered in the Officers Club to share stories that civilians would never understand. To become an MQ-7 pilot, you didn't just need skills, you needed to be accepted by men who'd proven themselves in the crucible of actual combat. It was a culture that valued instinct over analysis, experience over education, and brotherhood over individual achievement. The official requirements were posted in every recruitment office. MQ-7 Reaper pilot program seeks candidates with demonstrated aerial combat experience, advanced tactical training, and proven leadership under fire. But the unofficial requirements were whispered in conversations that Elena was never part of. We need killers, not thinkers. People who can pull the trigger when it matters, not second-guess themselves with data. Elena had applied for MQ-7 pilot training 4 times over the past 5 years. Each application had been rejected with identical form letters. While your analytical skills are commendable, the MQ-7 program requires operational experience that your current position has not provided. We encourage you to gain relevant combat experience and reapply in the future. The catch was that gaining relevant combat experience required being assigned to combat operations, which required already being qualified for combat operations. It was a perfect bureaucratic circle designed to keep support personnel in support roles permanently. Major Patricia Vance, the only woman who'd ever been considered for the MQ-7 program, had been rejected after scoring perfect marks on every technical evaluation. The official reason was insufficient flight hours in hostile environments. The real reason, according to locker room conversations that Elena overheard, was that women don't have the killer instinct necessary for precision elimination missions. The pilots made their exclusivity known in subtle ways. They arrived at the base each morning in a convoy of military vehicles that parked in reserved spaces closest to the command tower. They walked through the corridors with the confident stride of men who knew they were essential to national security. When they passed support personnel like Elena, they didn't make eye contact. It wasn't personal, it was simply the natural order of military hierarchy. During monthly all-hands briefings, the MQ-7 pilots sat in the front rows while support staff filled the back. When Colonel Harrison presented mission statistics, he always began with phrases like, "Our pilots have successfully neutralized 347 high-value targets," or, "Thanks to pilot skill and determination, we've eliminated key enemy leadership." The analysts who provided the targeting intelligence were never mentioned. Elena had calculated that her threat assessments had directly contributed to 67% of successful MQ-7 missions over the past 2 years. Her pattern recognition algorithms had identified enemy movement patterns that pilots used to predict ambush locations. Her communication intercept analysis had revealed enemy safe houses that became priority targets. But in official reports, these successes were attributed to superior pilot judgment and exceptional tactical awareness. The message was clear. The MQ-7 program was reserved for a special breed of warrior. People who'd proven themselves in the heat of battle, who'd earned their place through blood and courage, who understood that modern warfare still required ancient instincts. Support analysts might provide useful background information, but they could never understand the split-second decisions that real pilots made when lives hung in the balance. The 23 men who controlled America's most advanced weapons system had earned their positions through years of combat experience that no amount of education could replicate. They were the chosen few, the elite guardians of a technology too dangerous to trust to anyone who hadn't proven themselves in the crucible of actual warfare. Elena wasn't part of their world, and according to everything she'd been told, she never would be. The system was designed to keep people like her exactly where they belonged, 3 floors below, analyzing data while real warriors made the decisions that shaped the future of conflict. It was a barrier that had never been crossed, a standard that had never been questioned, and an exclusivity that defined the very identity of drone warfare itself. But sometimes, the most impenetrable barriers are the ones most ready to fall. Elena's workstation in the basement, analytics department, was a monument to institutional neglect. The fluorescent lights flickered sporadically, casting an uneven glow over equipment that hadn't been updated since the Bush administration. Her 6 monitors were different sizes and resolutions, salvaged from various budget cycles when the drone pilots upstairs received their annual technology upgrades. The air conditioning system wheezed constantly, struggling to cool a room that had been designed for half as many people and a quarter as much electronic equipment. The basement analytics wing housed 43 intelligence specialists, data analysts, and support technicians who formed the invisible backbone of every MQ-7 mission. They worked 12-hour shifts analyzing satellite imagery, processing communication intercepts, and generating the intelligence reports that pilots use to select targets and plan flight paths. Without their work, the 23 pilots upstairs would be flying blind into hostile territory, but recognition for their contributions was as scarce as decent coffee in the break room. Every morning at 0630 hours, Elena descended 3 flights of stairs from the main building to her underground workspace. The stairwell smelled of industrial cleaning fluid and the accumulated sweat of people who'd been working too hard for too long. The walls were lined with motivational posters that had been installed sometime during the Clinton presidency. Excellence is our standard, and mission first, people always. The irony wasn't lost on anyone who worked down here. The basement crew had their own unofficial motto, scrawled on a whiteboard near the coffee machine. We find them, they kill them, they get the credit. Elena's daily routine began with reviewing overnight intelligence reports from field operatives across 7 different time zones. She'd analyze communication intercepts that revealed enemy troop movements, process satellite imagery that showed supply convoy routes, and cross-reference financial intelligence that mapped terrorist funding networks. By 0800 hours, she'd typically identified 3 to 5 potential targets worthy of further investigation. Her reports went directly to Major William Torres, the liaison officer who served as intermediary between the basement analysts and the 7th-floor pilots. Torres was a former infantry officer who'd been reassigned to intelligence coordination after an IED explosion left him with a permanent limp and limited mobility. He treated his current position as temporary exile from real military work. and his attitude toward the analysts reflected that resentment. Another treasure hunt from the basement dwellers, Torres would announce when Elena submitted her daily threat assessments. He'd flip through her carefully prepared analysis with the attention span of someone reading junk mail. Lot of fancy charts and graphs here, Reeves. You sure these aren't just random dots you connected because you were bored? Elena's analysis of enemy communication patterns had revealed that the revolutionary, armed coalition was planning to relocate their command structure every 72 hours based on lunar cycles and regional weather patterns. It was a sophisticated operational security measure that explained why coalition forces had struggled to target enemy leadership for the past 3 years. She'd presented this discovery with mathematical models, historical correlation data, and predictive algorithms that showed 94% accuracy in forecasting enemy movements. Torres had dismissed it as theoretical speculation that won't help pilots in real combat situations. When Elena's pattern recognition software identified unusual financial transactions that suggested an imminent large-scale attack, Torres filed her report under low-priority intelligence without forwarding it to the pilots. 2 weeks later, revolutionary armed coalition forces executed a coordinated assault on 3 civilian targets using exactly the funding network Elena had mapped. 47 people died in attacks that could have been prevented if anyone had listened to the basement dweller who'd seen it coming. The pilots upstairs knew Elena and her colleagues existed, but they treated the analysts like invisible support machinery. When Major Ryan Foster, one of the MQ-7 pilots, visited the basement to collect intelligence reports, he'd address his questions to Torres while completely ignoring Elena, even when Torres redirected questions about specific analysis directly to her. Foster would continue looking at Torres while Elena provided answers. "Tell her I need more recent imagery of Grid Sector 7, Foster would say, as if Elena were a computer terminal rather than the person who'd spent 18 hours analyzing that exact sector. "I'm right here, Major Foster," Elena would respond. "I can provide real-time updates on enemy movement patterns in that area." Foster would nod dismissively at Torres. "Yeah, just have someone email me whatever data they think might be useful." The condescension wasn't limited to individual interactions. During monthly intelligence briefings, the basement analysts were required to present their findings to the pilot squadron. Elena would spend weeks preparing comprehensive threat assessments, complete with 3D mapping visualizations and predictive modeling that represented hundreds of hours of analysis. The pilots would listen with the polite attention of adults indulging children's science fair projects. Captain Derek Manning, the squadron's most decorated pilot, had a habit of interrupting Elena's presentations with questions designed to highlight her lack of combat experience. "That's interesting theory, Reeves. But have you ever actually been in a combat zone? Have you ever had enemy fighters trying to shoot you down while you're attempting to acquire a target? Because those academic models look pretty different when someone's launching surface-to-air missiles at your aircraft." Elena's response was always the same. "No, sir, I haven't. But my analysis is based on data from pilots who have faced those exact conditions, and the patterns I've identified could help you anticipate those threats before they become lethal." Manning would lean back in his chair with a smug expression. "That's the difference between us, Reeves. You see patterns in data. We see enemies trying to kill us. When you've actually been shot at, maybe you'll understand why real-world experience matters more than computer algorithms." The basement analysts had developed their own coping mechanisms for the constant dismissal. During lunch breaks, they'd gather in the break room to share stories of their contributions being ignored, their expertise being questioned, and their recommendations being overruled by people with less technical knowledge but more authority. They called it basement therapy, 20 minutes of mutual validation before returning to work that would be credited to someone else. "I identified the exact location of 3 revolutionary armed coalition supply depots last month," complained Dr. Sarah Kim, a signals intelligence specialist with a PhD from Stanford. My analysis was spot on. The pilots destroyed all 3 targets without any resistance. But in the after-action report, the success was attributed to superior pilot reconnaissance and tactical awareness. My name wasn't mentioned once. Elena's situation was particularly frustrating because her analytical capabilities far exceeded those of her colleagues, but her insights were consistently treated as background noise. She developed algorithms that could predict enemy behavior with greater accuracy than human intelligence sources, but decision-makers preferred actionable intelligence from proven sources over mathematical models from support personnel. Message from leadership was consistently clear. Analysts provide information, pilots make decisions, and the distinction between those roles was non-negotiable. Elena might possess exceptional technical skills, but she lacked the combat credentials that qualified someone to participate in operational planning. Her job was to generate data, not to interpret its implications for tactical decision-making. But Elena had stopped accepting that limitation. Late at night, when the basement was nearly empty except for the overnight shift monitoring global intelligence feeds, she'd been conducting her own analysis. Not the routine threat assessments that Torres would dismiss, but comprehensive strategic analysis that revealed something extraordinary. She'd discovered exactly how to end the war. The photograph on Elena's desk showed 2 siblings in dress uniforms, arms around each other's shoulders, both grinning with the infectious confidence of people who believed the military would always do the right thing. Captain David Reeves had been 28 when the picture was taken, already the youngest MQ-7 pilot ever certified for combat operations. Elena had been 26, fresh from completing her intelligence analyst training at Fort Gordon, absolutely certain that her mathematical mind and her brother's tactical brilliance would make them an unstoppable team in the fight against terrorism. That was before Operation Crimson Dawn destroyed everything they'd believed about military justice. David had been stationed at Kandahar Air Base in Afghanistan, conducting precision strike missions against revolutionary armed coalition leadership throughout the region. His record was flawless: 47 confirmed eliminations of high-value targets, 0 civilian casualties, 0 friendly fire incidents. He possessed an almost supernatural ability to thread Hellfire missiles through windows from 30,000 feet, delivering ordnance with surgical precision that left enemy combatants neutralized, while leaving nearby civilians completely unharmed. The intelligence community called David the Surgeon because his strikes were so precise that they could eliminate a terrorist leader sitting at a dinner table without harming his family members in the next room. His success rate was so exceptional that he'd been selected for the most sensitive missions, requiring absolute precision. Eliminations in densely populated, urban areas where a single targeting error could create international incidents. Elena had been working at Fort Meridian's predecessor facility, providing analytical support for David's missions from 7,000 miles away. She'd process intelligence reports, analyze satellite imagery, and generate targeting recommendations that David would review before conducting strikes. Their collaboration was seamless. Elena's mathematical precision combined with David's tactical instincts created a brother-sister team that enemy leaders learned to fear. The targeting package for Operation Crimson Dawn had been developed by the Central Intelligence Agency's Counterterrorism Center, based on human intelligence sources who claimed to have identified Viktor Kozlov's location. According to the intelligence report, Kozlov was using a medical clinic in the city of Al-Rashid as a front for Revolutionary Armed Coalition command operations. The sources reported that Kozlov conducted strategic planning meetings in the clinic's basement during evening hours when the facility was supposedly closed to patients. Elena had reviewed the targeting intelligence and immediately identified inconsistencies that suggested the information was unreliable. The supposed intelligence sources had provided conflicting details about the clinic's layout, inconsistent descriptions of Kozlov's security procedures, and timing information that didn't correlate with established patterns of enemy leadership. Behavior. Her analysis indicated a 73% probability that the intelligence was either outdated or deliberately fabricated. She'd submitted a formal intelligence assessment recommending additional verification before authorizing the strike. Her report detailed 12 specific inconsistencies in the source material and proposed alternative methods for confirming Kozlov's location. The assessment had been classified priority review and forwarded to the Mission Planning Committee, responsible for Operation Crimson Dawn. 3 days later, Elena received notification that her concerns had been reviewed by senior intelligence officials and determined to be based on overly cautious analysis that could delay time-sensitive operations. The mission would proceed as planned, with David conducting the strike based on the original CIA intelligence package. Elena had called David directly, using encrypted communication channels to express her concerns about the targeting intelligence. David trusted his sister's analytical abilities more than any official intelligence assessment, and he'd agreed to request additional confirmation before conducting the strike. But military protocol required that any mission delays be approved by the commanding officer responsible for the operation, Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Webb. The officer commanding the Afghanistan drone operations had denied David's request for additional intelligence verification. Webb's response was documented in the official mission records. Captain Reeves is authorized to conduct strikes based on approved targeting packages, not to second-guess intelligence assessments prepared by senior analysts. The mission will proceed as scheduled. David had protested that his sister's analysis suggested significant problems with the targeting intelligence, but Webb had dismissed Elena's assessment as theoretical analysis from support personnel who lack operational experience. The strike authorization remained in effect, with David ordered to eliminate the target within a 6-hour window to prevent Kozlov from relocating. On March 15 at 0347 hours local time, David's MQ-7 Reaper drone fired 2 Hellfire missiles into the Al-Rashid Medical Clinic. The building was completely destroyed, along with an adjacent pharmacy and a residential apartment where a family had been sleeping. The immediate casualty count was 43 people killed, including 12 children, 8 medical professionals, and 23 civilians who'd been seeking emergency medical treatment. Viktor Kozlov was not at the clinic. He had never been at the clinic. The Revolutionary Armed Coalition leader was located 200 miles away, conducting operations from a completely different facility. The CIA's intelligence sources had been either compromised or deliberately providing false information to provoke exactly the kind of civilian casualty incident that would damage American credibility in the region. The international response was immediate and devastating. Al Jazeera broadcast footage of crying children being pulled from the rubble. The United Nations Security Council condemned the attack as a violation of international humanitarian law. Revolutionary Armed Coalition propaganda units used images of the destroyed clinic to recruit new fighters throughout the Middle East. Within 48 hours, the incident had become a strategic disaster that strengthened the very enemy it was supposed to eliminate. David had requested an immediate investigation into the intelligence failure that led to the strike. He'd provided detailed documentation of Elena's concerns, copies of his communications requesting additional verification, and evidence that the targeting intelligence contained significant inconsistencies. His request was denied. Instead, he was informed that discussing operational details with unauthorized personnel, including his sister, violated security protocols and could result in court-martial proceedings. 2 weeks later, David was dead. The official report listed the cause as accidental equipment malfunction during routine maintenance operations. According to the investigation, David had been conducting standard maintenance on his MQ-7 drone's missile systems when a Hellfire missile experienced an electrical malfunction and detonated while still mounted on the aircraft. The explosion killed David instantly and destroyed the drone he'd been working on. Elena knew the truth. David had been consumed by guilt over the civilian casualties he'd caused by following orders based on false intelligence. His final encrypted message to Elena had been sent just hours before his death. "I can't live with what they made me do. The system is broken and they'll never fix it. Don't let them do this to anyone else." The military's response to the al-Rashid incident was to implement new oversight procedures for intelligence verification and to reassign personnel who'd been involved in the mission planning process. Elena's security clearance was downgraded from top secret to secret, effectively ending her ability to work on sensitive targeting operations. The official reason was potential security concerns related to unauthorized disclosure of operational information. Lieutenant Colonel Webb received a promotion to full colonel and was transferred to a prestigious Pentagon assignment. The CIA officials who'd provided the false intelligence were reassigned to different departments with no disciplinary action. The intelligence sources who'd fabricated the information about Kozlov's location were never identified or prosecuted. Elena had spent the past 5 years watching the people responsible for her brother's death advance their careers while she was relegated to routine analysis work that kept her away from anything that mattered. She'd been systematically excluded from operations that could prevent the kind of intelligence failures that had killed David and those 43 innocent people, but she'd never stopped investigating Viktor Kozlov's actual location, working during off hours, using her downgraded security clearance to access historical intelligence databases. Elena had been building a comprehensive profile of revolutionary armed coalition operations that revealed patterns invisible to conventional analysis. She discovered something that the CIA's human intelligence sources and the military's operational planners had missed for 20 years. She knew exactly where Kozlov was hiding, exactly how his organization operated, and exactly how to eliminate him without harming a single civilian. But the same people who'd ignored her warnings about al-Rashid were now ignoring her discoveries about ending the war. David had died, believing the system could never be fixed. Elena was about to prove him wrong. The emergency alert pierced through Fort Meridian at exactly 13:47 hours on a Tuesday afternoon that had started like any other day in the 20-year war against the Revolutionary Armed Coalition. Elena was deep in analysis of intercepted communications from the Kandahar region when every computer screen in the basement simultaneously flashed red with an automated message that made her blood freeze. DEFCON 2, immediate threat to homeland, all personnel. Report to emergency stations. The Revolutionary Armed Coalition had done something unprecedented in 2 decades of asymmetric warfare. They'd successfully infiltrated American soil. Elena's workstation exploded with incoming intelligence feeds as the scope of the crisis became clear. At 13:42 hours, coordinated explosions had destroyed 3 major transportation hubs across the United States: Los Angeles International Airport, Union Station in Washington, D.C., and the Port of Miami's main shipping terminal. Preliminary casualty estimates exceeded 400 people killed, with thousands more injured. But the explosions weren't the primary threat. They were a diversion. While emergency responders rushed to the bombing sites, Revolutionary Armed Coalition sleeper cells had simultaneously seized control of the Millfield nuclear research facility in upstate New York. The facility housed enough weapons-grade plutonium to construct 12 nuclear devices, along with the technical expertise necessary to weaponize radiological materials. According to intercepted communications, the terrorists had barricaded themselves inside the facility's main laboratory with 17 hostages, including 3 nuclear physicists, and the facility director. Viktor Kozlov himself was confirmed to be leading the operation. The The basement analytics wing transformed into a chaos of urgent voices and frantic keyboard typing as every analyst worked to process the flood of incoming intelligence. Elena watched her colleagues scramble to analyze satellite imagery, communication intercepts, and real-time surveillance feeds from the nuclear facility. The scale of coordination required for this operation was staggering. It represented years of planning, massive financial resources, and intelligence capabilities that the enemy had somehow developed without detection. But Elena recognized something that everyone else was missing. The attack pattern matched predictive models she'd been developing for the past 18 months. She'd identified this exact scenario in her comprehensive analysis of revolutionary armed coalition operations, the analysis that had been dismissed as theoretical speculation by Major Torres and ignored by the pilot squadron. Elena's mathematical models had predicted that Kozlov would eventually attempt a radiological terrorism operation on American soil, using conventional attacks as diversions while seizing nuclear materials for a catastrophic finale to their 20-year campaign. 6 months ago, Elena had submitted a classified report titled Convergence Point Analysis, RAC Strategic Endgame Scenarios, that outlined this precise sequence of events. She'd identified Millfield Nuclear Research Facility as the most likely target based on its security vulnerabilities, geographic isolation, and inventory of weapons-grade materials. Her analysis had recommended immediate security upgrades, enhanced surveillance protocols, and contingency planning for exactly this type of scenario. The report had been filed under low-priority theoretical analysis and forgotten. Major Torres burst into the basement analytics wing, his face pale with the kind of panic that comes from realizing you're completely unprepared for a crisis you should have seen coming. I need everything we have on Viktor Kozlov's current operational capabilities, he shouted over the noise of 43 analysts working at maximum intensity. Real-time intelligence only. No theoretical analysis. Just actionable intelligence that pilots can use immediately. Elena looked up from her workstation where she'd been tracking the exact communication patterns she'd predicted in her ignored report. Major Torres, I have comprehensive analysis of Kozlov's likely next moves based on Reeves. I don't have time for your computer models, Torres interrupted, sweat visible on his forehead despite the basement's cold air. I need current intelligence from proven sources. Save the academic analysis for after we deal with this crisis. But Elena had been tracking revolutionary armed coalition communications for the past 6 hours, watching the mathematical pattern she'd identified 18 months ago play out in real time. Kozlov wasn't just holding a nuclear facility hostage, he was implementing a complex psychological warfare operation designed to force American military commanders into making exactly the kinds of tactical errors that had defined this conflict. For 20 years, the nuclear facility seizure was Phase 1. Kozlov knew that American forces would attempt a rescue operation, and he'd positioned his forces to ensure that any conventional assault would result in massive civilian casualties and potential radiological contamination. The facility's layout, the hostage locations, and the placement of explosive devices had been calculated to make traditional rescue operations impossible. Phase 2 would be triggered when American commanders realized that conventional tactics wouldn't work. They'd escalate to precision drone strikes, attempting to eliminate Kozlov and his leadership while minimizing collateral damage. But Kozlov had anticipated this response and positioned himself in the facility's main laboratory, surrounded by both hostages and radiological materials that would create a catastrophic dirty bomb. If struck by missiles, Phase 3 was the endgame. Kozlov would use the failed rescue attempts and resulting casualties to justify triggering a radiological device that would contaminate hundreds of square miles, creating a permanent no-go zone in the American heartland while demonstrating the revolutionary armed coalition's ability to strike anywhere at any time. Elena had seen this exact scenario in her predictive models, and she'd identified the one tactical approach that could prevent the catastrophic outcome Kozlov was orchestrating. But it required precise intelligence about the facility's internal layout, real-time tracking of hostage locations, and surgical precision targeting that could eliminate Kozlov without triggering the radiological catastrophe he'd prepared. More importantly, it required someone who understood the mathematical principles underlying Kozlov's strategy well enough to anticipate his moves and counter them proactively. Upstairs in the 7th floor command center, the 23 MQ-7 pilots were preparing for what Colonel Harrison was calling the most critical mission in the history of drone warfare. But Elena could see from the intelligence briefings being transmitted to the pilots that they were walking directly into Kozlov's trap. The conventional tactical approaches they'd been trained for would play perfectly into the enemy leader's psychological warfare strategy. The crisis was escalating faster than anyone had anticipated. Kozlov had given the United States government a 12-hour ultimatum: withdraw all American military forces from the Middle East and Central Asia, or he would detonate a radiological device that would contaminate the eastern seaboard from New York to Virginia. Intelligence estimates suggested that such a device could kill 50,000 people immediately and displace 2 million more from their homes permanently. But the real deadline was much shorter. Elena's analysis of revolutionary armed coalition communication patterns indicated that Kozlov planned to trigger the device in exactly 6 hours, regardless of any American response to his demands. The ultimatum was psychological warfare designed to create panic and force rush decision-making that would result in tactical errors. Elena watched the intelligence reports flowing upstairs to the pilots and realized that everyone was about to make exactly the mistakes that would give Kozlov his victory. The conventional wisdom was to either attempt a ground assault that would result in massive casualties, or conduct precision airstrikes that would trigger the very radiological catastrophe Kozlov wanted to create. There was a third option, but it required someone who understood Kozlov's operational patterns well enough to predict his exact movements within the facility. Elena had that knowledge. She'd spent 5 years building a comprehensive behavioral profile of the revolutionary armed coalition leader that revealed his decision-making patterns, security protocols, and psychological vulnerabilities. More importantly, she'd identified a 47-minute window when Kozlov would be isolated from both hostages and radiological materials, conducting a security sweep that followed mathematical patterns he'd used consistently for 15 years. During that window, a precision strike could eliminate him without harming civilians or triggering radiological contamination. But the window would open in exactly 4 hours and 23 minutes. And Elena was the only person who knew it existed. The pilots upstairs were preparing for a mission that would either fail catastrophically or succeed in triggering the largest radiological disaster in American history. The ground forces were planning an assault that would result in massive casualties among both military personnel and civilian hostages. The political leadership was considering capitulation to terrorists, demands that would fundamentally alter American foreign policy. Elena looked at her computer screen, displaying the real-time countdown to Kozlov's optimal elimination window. Then, at the photograph of her brother David at his pilot uniform. The system had failed him, failed those 43 civilians in Al-Rashid, and was about to fail the entire United States of America, unless someone who understood the mathematics of warfare was willing to step outside the boundaries of their assigned role and do what needed to be done. Elena stared at her computer screen as the countdown timer displayed 4 hours, 17 minutes, and 33 seconds until Viktor Kozlov's elimination window would open. Around her, the basement analytics wing had devolved into controlled chaos, as 43 intelligence specialists worked frantically to provide real-time support for what everyone knew would be the most critical military operation in decades. The fluorescent lights seemed brighter, the air conditioning louder, and every keystroke carried the weight of national security. But Elena wasn't processing routine intelligence anymore. She was watching America's military leadership make the same catastrophic mistakes that had defined 20 years of failed counter-terrorism operations. The intelligence briefings flowing upstairs to Colonel Harrison and the MQ-7 pilots contained exactly the kind of reactive tactical thinking that Kozlov had been exploiting for 2 decades. Ground assault teams were preparing to breach the nuclear facility through predetermined entry points that Kozlov had obviously identified and prepared to defend. Air support units were developing strike packages targeting the facility's external defenses, completely ignoring the fact that any external explosions could trigger the radiological catastrophe Kozlov wanted to create. Most critically, the pilots were planning to conduct conventional surveillance and targeting operations that would give Kozlov hours of advance warning about American intentions. Elena could see from the drone deployment schedules that they intended to establish persistent overhead surveillance, conduct thermal imaging sweeps, and monitor enemy communications using methods that Kozlov had been countering successfully. For 15 years, Elena's mathematical models showed that these CONFLICT approaches had a 97% probability of resulting in either massive American casualties during a ground assault or successful detonation of a radiological device that would contaminate the eastern seaboard. The operational timeline being developed upstairs would give Kozlov multiple opportunities to trigger his weapon, multiple escape routes if the initial plan failed, and multiple ways to maximize civilian casualties, regardless of American tactical decisions. But Elena had identified something that everyone else was missing. Kozlov's operational patterns weren't random. They followed mathematical principles that he'd been using consistently since the beginning of his terrorist career. His security protocols, movement schedules, and decision-making processes all adhered to algorithms that Elena had been mapping for 5 years. More specifically, Kozlov conducted personal security sweeps of any facility he occupied at precisely 4-hour intervals, following routes that optimized his ability to detect surveillance, while minimizing his exposure to potential threats. During these sweeps, he separated himself from hostages, radiological materials, and communications equipment to prevent any of these assets from being compromised if he was detected by enemy forces. In exactly 4 hours and 12 minutes, Kozlov would begin a 47-minute security sweep that would take him to the facility's eastern observation tower, a reinforced concrete structure located 200 meters from the main laboratory building. During this sweep, he would be completely isolated from both the hostages and the radiological materials, accompanied only by 2 bodyguards and carrying minimal communications equipment. It was the only window of opportunity to eliminate him without triggering the catastrophic outcomes he'd engineered. Elena had tried to communicate this intelligence through proper channels. She'd submitted urgent intelligence reports to Major Torres detailing Kozlov's security patterns, the optimal targeting window, and the precise timing required for successful elimination. Torres had dismissed her analysis as unverified speculation, based on theoretical modeling, and refused to forward her recommendations to the operational planners upstairs. "Reeves, for the last time, I don't have bandwidth for your academic theories," Torres had said when Elena attempted to explain the significance of Kozlov's security protocols. "The pilots need actionable intelligence from proven sources, not mathematical models from someone who's never been in a combat zone. Focus on your assigned tasks and let the professionals handle operational planning." But Elena knew that the professionals were about to orchestrate the largest terrorist victory in American history by following exactly the tactical playbook that Kozlov had been anticipating for 20 years. The conventional wisdom that had guided American counterterrorism operations was perfectly designed to produce the outcome Kozlov wanted: massive casualties, political humiliation, and proof that the United States could be successfully attacked on its own soil. Elena looked around the basement at her colleagues, frantically processing intelligence that would be ignored, generating analysis that would be dismissed, and providing support for an operation that was destined to fail. Dr. Sarah Kim was analyzing satellite imagery that showed obvious defensive preparations Kozlov had made to counter ground assault. Lieutenant Alex Rivera was intercepting communications that clearly indicated Kozlov's intention to detonate his device, regardless of American tactical decisions. Senior analyst Patricia Wong was tracking financial flows that revealed the full scope of revolutionary armed coalition infiltration into American infrastructure. All of their work was being filtered through Major Torres and transmitted upstairs as background intelligence that wouldn't influence the operational decisions being made by people who understood warfare but didn't understand. Viktor Kozlov. Elena's workstation displayed multiple screens, showing real-time intelligence feeds from the nuclear facility. She could see thermal imaging that revealed the exact locations of hostages, communication intercepts that showed Kozlov's psychological state, and facility blueprints that indicated optimal angles of approach for precision targeting. She had access to more comprehensive intelligence about this operation than anyone else in the American military, and she was the only person who understood how to use that intelligence to prevent catastrophe. More importantly, Elena had been conducting unauthorized analysis of the MQ-7 drone systems for the past 2 years. During off hours, using her security clearance to access technical manuals and training simulators, she'd been learning the operational procedures that her brother David had mastered. She understood the aircraft's capabilities, targeting systems, and flight characteristics better than most of the pilots who flew them professionally. Elena had logged over 800 hours in MQ-7 flight simulators, using training programs that she'd accessed through her analyst credentials. She'd studied every targeting scenario, practiced every emergency procedure, and mastered the precise coordination between surveillance sensors and weapons systems that successful drone operations required. Her simulation scores exceeded those of several active pilots, though no one besides Elena knew those records existed. The countdown timer on her screen showed 4 hours, 3 minutes, and 17 seconds until Kozlov's elimination window opened. In the operational timeline being developed upstairs, the pilots wouldn't even begin their surveillance phase until 6 hours from now, which meant they'd completely missed the only opportunity to eliminate Kozlov without triggering the radiological disaster he'd prepared. Elena opened her desk drawer and removed her brother David's pilot wings, the silver insignia he'd worn during his 47 successful elimination missions. She'd kept them since his death as a reminder of what precision warfare could accomplish when guided by accurate intelligence and executed by someone who understood both the technology and the enemy. David had died because he'd been forced to follow orders based on false intelligence, orders issued by people who didn't understand either the target or the tactical situation. Elena was watching the same dynamic unfold on a scale that would make David's tragedy look insignificant by comparison, but Elena possessed something that David hadn't: complete knowledge of both the enemy's operational patterns and the weapon systems needed to exploit those patterns. She understood Viktor Kozlov's psychology, his security protocols, and his strategic objectives better than anyone in the American intelligence community. She also understood MQ-7 drone capabilities, targeting procedures, and flight operations better than most of the pilots who'd been trained for years to conduct these missions. Elena closed the drawer containing David's wings and stood up from her workstation. Around her, the basement analysts continued their frantic work, generating intelligence that would be ignored while America's enemies achieved their greatest victory in 2 decades of asymmetric warfare. She walked across the basement to the secure elevator that connected the analytics wing to the main building. Her security badge would provide access to most areas of Fort Meridian, including the 7th floor command center, where the MQ-7 pilots were preparing for their doomed mission. Elena pressed the elevator call button and waited. When the doors opened, she stepped inside and selected the 7th floor. As the elevator began to rise, she realized that she was about to cross a line that would either save her country or destroy her career. But after watching 5 years of institutional failure, systematic dismissal of expertise, and operational incompetence that had cost her brother's life and countless others, Elena had stopped caring about the consequences of doing what needed to be done. The elevator doors opened onto the 7th floor, and Elena stepped into the world that had always been forbidden to people like her. The 7th floor of Fort Meridian existed in a different universe from the basement analytics wing. Elena stepped out of the elevator into an environment that radiated military precision and technological supremacy. The corridor walls were lined with photographs of successful MQ-7 missions, displaying high-resolution imagery of precision strikes that had eliminated terrorist leaders across multiple continents. Polished titanium plaques listed the names of pilots who'd conducted the most significant eliminations in the drone program's history. Everything about the space communicated that this was where real warfare happened, conducted by real warriors who'd earned their place through blood and courage. Elena's analyst credentials triggered an immediate security alert when she used her badge to access the drone control center. The biometric scanner flashed red 3 times before reluctantly granting access, and she could hear electronic notifications being transmitted to security personnel throughout the building. Her presence on the 7th floor would be logged, tracked, and reported to supervisors who would want explanations for why support staff was accessing operational areas during a national security crisis. But Elena had stopped caring about explanations. In 3 hours and 41 minutes, Viktor Kozlov would begin his security sweep, creating the only opportunity to prevent a radiological catastrophe that would kill thousands of Americans and fundamentally alter the balance of global terrorism. The people trained to conduct this elimination were preparing for a mission that would fail catastrophically because they didn't understand either the enemy or the optimal timing for success. The Drone Control Center was a cathedral of advanced technology. 23 individual pilot stations arranged in semicircular tiers, each one surrounded by holographic displays showing real-time intelligence feeds from different global conflict zones. The central command station featured a massive wall display showing worldwide drone operations, with thin green lines connecting each aircraft to its target area. Elena could see MQ-7 Reapers conducting surveillance over Afghanistan, Pakistan, Yemen, and Syria simultaneously, their positions updated in real time through satellite communication links. Colonel Harrison stood at the central command station, surrounded by the 7 pilots who'd been selected for the Millfield operation. Elena recognized their faces from intelligence briefings. These were the most experienced MQ-7 operators in the program, veterans of hundreds of precision strikes who'd eliminated more terrorist leaders than any other military unit in history. They wore flight suits adorned with patches indicating their combat experience, confirmed kills, and specialized training certifications. Elena approached the group with her laptop containing the comprehensive intelligence analysis that could save the mission. Her footsteps echoed across the polished metal floor, causing several pilots to turn and stare with expressions of confusion and annoyance. Support personnel weren't supposed to access the control center without explicit authorization, especially during operational planning sessions. "Excuse me, Colonel Harrison," Elena said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. "I have critical intelligence about Viktor Kozlov's operational patterns that could determine the success of this mission." Harrison looked up from the tactical display with the irritated expression of someone whose concentration had been interrupted by an unwelcome distraction. He was 54 years old, silver-haired, with the weathered features of a man who'd spent decades making life-and-death decisions under pressure. His eyes showed no recognition of Elena's name or face. She was just another analyst from the basement who'd somehow gained access to an area where she didn't belong. "Who authorized your presence in this control center?" Harrison asked sharply. "This is a classified operational planning session restricted to certified MQ-7 personnel." "Sir, I'm Lieutenant Commander Elena Reeves from the Intelligence Analysis Division," Elena replied, opening her laptop to display the targeting analysis she'd prepared. "I've identified a specific time window when Kozlov will be isolated from hostages and radiological materials. This intelligence is critical for mission success." Major Ryan Foster, the lead pilot selected for the Kozlov elimination, stepped forward with an expression of barely controlled anger. Elena recognized him as one of the pilots who'd consistently ignored her intelligence reports, treating her recommendations as irrelevant background noise generated by support personnel who didn't understand real warfare. "Colonel, this is exactly the kind of interference we can't afford during a crisis," Foster said, gesturing dismissively toward Elena. "We have combat-proven pilots with years of experience conducting precision eliminations. We don't need theoretical analysis from someone who's never been within 1,000 miles of actual combat." Elena ignored Foster's condescension and addressed Harrison directly. "Sir, the current operational timeline completely misses the optimal elimination window. Kozlov conducts security sweeps at 4-hour intervals following mathematical patterns. I've been tracking for 5 years. In exactly 3 hours and 37 minutes, he'll be isolated in the facility's eastern observation tower for 47 minutes. This is the only opportunity to eliminate him without triggering radiological contamination." Captain Derek Manning, the pilot Elena remembered from countless intelligence briefings where her expertise had been dismissed, laughed openly at her presentation. "Listen to this, guys. The basement analyst thinks she's discovered some secret pattern that actual intelligence professionals have missed. Let me guess you've got some computer algorithm that can predict enemy behavior better than human intelligence sources." "As a matter of fact, yes," Elena responded calmly. "My predictive models have demonstrated 94% accuracy in forecasting revolutionary armed coalition operations over the past 18 months. The pattern recognition algorithms I've developed can anticipate Kozlov's movements with greater precision than conventional intelligence methods." The 7 pilots exchanged glances that combined amusement with annoyance. Elena could see them dismissing her analysis before they'd even reviewed the data, exactly the same way Major Torres had been dismissing her work for the past 5 years. Their body language communicated absolute confidence that their combat experience qualified them to make tactical decisions that someone with Elena's background could never understand. Lieutenant Colonel James Mitchell, Harrison's deputy commander, stepped forward to end what he clearly viewed as an unwelcome interruption. "Miss Reeves, I'm sure your analysis is very thorough, but operational planning requires more than theoretical models. These pilots have conducted hundreds of successful eliminations, using proven tactics developed through years of combat experience. Your role is to provide intelligence support, not to question operational decisions made by certified professionals." Elena felt the familiar frustration of watching people with authority dismiss expertise they didn't understand, but this time the stakes were measured in thousands of American lives, rather than missed opportunities or career advancement. She opened her laptop and turned the screen toward Harrison, displaying the comprehensive behavioral analysis she'd developed of Kozlov's security protocols. "Colonel, with respect, this isn't theoretical analysis," Elena said, her voice carrying an edge of urgency that reflected the countdown timer running in her mind. "I've mapped every documented movement Kozlov has made for the past 15 years. His security sweeps follow mathematical patterns that can be predicted with surgical precision. If we miss this window, he'll trigger his radiological device regardless. of any tactical pressure we apply. Foster moved closer to Elena with an expression of barely controlled anger. You think you understand Viktor Kozlov better than the intelligence professionals who've been hunting him for 2 decades? You think your computer models are more reliable than human intelligence sources who've risked their lives gathering information about enemy operations? My computer models predicted this exact attack scenario 6 months ago, Elena replied steadily. The same intelligence professionals you're referring to dismissed my analysis as theoretical speculation. If they'd listened, we could have prevented this crisis entirely. The pilot's expressions shifted from amusement to genuine anger. Elena realized she'd crossed a line by implying that their operational failures had contributed to the current crisis, but she was beyond caring about diplomatic protocol. In 3 hours and 31 minutes, the only opportunity to prevent catastrophe would open, and these men were planning to waste it on conventional tactics that would play directly into Kozlov's strategic planning. Harrison raised his hand to silence the growing argument. Lieutenant Commander Reeves, I appreciate your dedication to providing intelligence support, but operational decisions are made by personnel with appropriate training and experience. Your analysis will be reviewed by qualified intelligence officers and incorporated into our planning process as appropriate. Elena knew that reviewed by qualified intelligence officers meant her analysis would be filed under unsolicited input from support personnel and ignored completely. She'd watched the same dismissal process destroy her brother's attempts to prevent civilian casualties, and she was watching it happen again on a scale that would dwarf every previous intelligence failure in American military history. Sir, there won't be time for review processes, Elena said, her voice rising slightly despite her efforts to maintain professional composure. The elimination window opens in 3 hours and 29 minutes. If we miss it, Kozlov will detonate his device and kill thousands of Americans. I'm the only person in this building who knows when and where he'll be vulnerable. Manning stepped forward with the expression of open hostility. Colonel, we need to remove this analyst from the control center immediately. She's disrupting operational planning with unauthorized interference. Security should escort her back to the basement where she belongs. Elena looked around the control center at the faces of men who possessed the technical skills to prevent catastrophe but lacked the intelligence necessary to identify the optimal approach. She could see MQ-7 control stations that she understood better than most of the pilots who operated them. She could see tactical displays showing real-time intelligence that she'd helped generate. She could see weapon systems capable of surgical precision that were about to be used with the subtlety of sledgehammers. Harrison reached for his communication device to summon security personnel, who would remove Elena from the operational area and return her to the basement where support staff belonged. The brief window of opportunity to provide critical intelligence was closing, just like every other window of opportunity she'd tried to create over the past 5 years. But Elena had stopped accepting the limitations that other people tried to impose on her capabilities. She'd spent 2 years learning MQ-7 operational procedures, 5 years developing comprehensive intelligence about Viktor Kozlov, and her entire career watching qualified people make catastrophic mistakes because they didn't understand either their enemies or their own technology. Elena closed her laptop and looked directly at Colonel Harrison. Sir, I formally request authorization to conduct the Kozlov elimination mission as primary pilot for MQ-7 unit designation Reaper 7. The control center fell completely silent. The silence in the MQ-7 control center stretched for exactly 17 seconds before Major Foster's shocked laughter shattered the tension. Did you just request authorization to fly a combat mission? Colonel, we need to have this analyst removed from the premises immediately. She's clearly experiencing some kind of psychological breakdown under pressure. Elena stood motionless at the center of the semicircle of pilot stations, surrounded by 7 combat veterans who were staring at her with expressions ranging from disbelief to outright hostility. Colonel Harrison's face had gone pale with what appeared to be genuine concern for Elena's mental state. The idea that a basement analyst would formally request authorization to conduct the most critical drone elimination in American military history was so unprecedented that none of them knew how to respond. "Lieutenant Commander Reeves," Harrison said slowly, speaking in the careful tone reserved for people experiencing emotional crises, "I think the stress of the situation may be affecting your judgment. Perhaps you should return to your workstation." And the secure elevator chimed softly, its doors opening to reveal 3 figures who transformed the entire dynamic of the confrontation. General Patricia Valdez stepped into the control center first, her 4-star insignia catching the holographic light from the tactical displays. Behind her walked a woman in civilian clothes whose unremarkable appearance concealed her position as Deputy Director of the Central Intelligence Agency. The third figure wore the dress uniform of a Navy admiral, his chest decorated with ribbons indicating combat service in 3 different wars. Elena's request for pilot authorization suddenly became irrelevant as every person in the control center snapped to attention with military precision that bordered on religious reverence. General Valdez commanded the Pentagon Special Operations Division, making her the highest-ranking officer in the drone warfare program's chain of command. Her unannounced arrival during a national security crisis meant that operational decisions were about to be made at levels far above Colonel Harrison's authority. "As you were," Valdez said, her voice carrying the quiet authority of someone accustomed to controlling rooms full of powerful people. She was 52 years old, African American, with the controlled demeanor of a person who'd spent decades making decisions that affected global security. Her eyes swept across the control center, taking in the tactical displays, pilot stations, and the obviously tense confrontation that had been interrupted by her arrival. Elena recognized General Valdez from classified briefings, but she'd never been in the same room with someone whose decisions shaped American military policy at the highest levels. Valdez had been the architect of the drone warfare program's expansion, the strategic mind behind precision elimination operations that had eliminated terrorist leadership across multiple continents. She was also the person who'd ultimately been responsible for the intelligence failures that had led to her brother David's death. "Colonel Harrison," Valdez said, approaching the central command station where the Millfield operation timeline was displayed, "I need a complete briefing on your tactical approach for the Kozlov elimination. The President is monitoring this situation personally, and he's expressed concerns about our readiness to prevent radiological catastrophe." Harrison straightened his shoulders and began presenting the operational plan that Elena knew would fail catastrophically. "General, we've identified 3 potential approach vectors for the elimination. Our primary plan involves establishing persistent surveillance over the nuclear facility, followed by precision strikes when Kozlov exposes himself during facility security operations. We estimate a 6-hour operational window to complete target acquisition and elimination." Elena watched Valdez review the tactical timeline and realized that even the highest levels of military leadership were preparing to make the same fundamental mistakes that had characterized 20 years of counterterrorism failures. The operational plan assumed that Kozlov would follow conventional security procedures that could be anticipated through standard intelligence analysis, but Elena knew that Kozlov's behavioral patterns were far more sophisticated than conventional. Wisdom suggested. The CIA deputy director stepped forward with a tablet displaying intelligence assessments that Elena recognized as fundamentally flawed. "General, our human intelligence sources indicate that Kozlov is using the nuclear facility's main laboratory as his primary command center. We recommend targeting that location during the initial phase of operations to eliminate both leadership and radiological threats simultaneously." Elena felt her heart racing as she realized that the CIA was providing exactly the same kind of false intelligence that had led to the al-Rashid disaster. Their human intelligence sources were either compromised or deliberately providing misinformation, designed to provoke American forces into triggering the radiological catastrophe that Kozlov wanted to create. Elena's analysis clearly showed that Kozlov would never position himself in the main laboratory during potential combat operations. That location was obviously designed to function as a trap for American forces. Admiral Richardson, III, member of the visiting delegation, reviewed satellite imagery that showed the facility's external defenses. Our tactical assessment suggests that ground assault operations would result in unacceptable casualties, given the defensive preparations Kozlov has implemented. Precision airstrikes represent our most viable option for successful elimination. Elena realized that she was watching the highest levels of American military leadership walk directly into a carefully orchestrated trap that would result in exactly the outcome Kozlov had been planning for months. Their tactical analysis was based on conventional intelligence methods that Kozlov had been successfully countering for 2 decades. Their operational timeline completely ignored the mathematical patterns that governed his security procedures. Their target selection was based on false intelligence that would trigger radiological contamination across hundreds of square miles. General Valdez studied the operational plan with the focused attention of someone who understood that her decisions would determine whether thousands of Americans lived or died. Elena could see her processing the tactical analysis, evaluating the intelligence assessments, and preparing to authorize an operation that would achieve the largest terrorist victory in American history. Colonel Harrison, Valdez said slowly, "What's your confidence level in this operational approach? Are we missing any critical intelligence that could affect mission success?" Harrison glanced briefly at Elena before responding to the general. "Ma'am, we have comprehensive intelligence support from our analytics division. All available information has been reviewed and incorporated into our planning process." Elena realized that this was her final opportunity to prevent catastrophe. In 2 hours and 47 minutes, Viktor Kozlov would begin his security sweep, creating the only window for successful elimination. The military leadership was preparing to authorize an operation that would miss that window entirely, triggering exactly the radiological disaster that Kozlov had engineered as his ultimate victory against American counterterrorism efforts. But Elena also realized that General Valdez was the person who'd been ultimately responsible for the intelligence procedures that had killed her brother, David. The same institutional failures that had led to the al-Rashid civilian casualties were being repeated on a scale that would make David's tragedy look insignificant by comparison. Elena stepped forward from the circle of pilots and addressed General Valdez directly. "Ma'am, with respect, the current operational plan is based on fundamental misunderstanding of the target's behavioral patterns. I have comprehensive analysis showing that Viktor Kozlov follows mathematical security protocols that create a specific elimination window in exactly 2 hours and 44 minutes. Every person in the control center turned to stare at Elena with expressions of shock that a junior officer would interrupt a strategic planning session involving 4-star generals and CIA leadership. Major Foster moved toward Elena as if preparing to physically remove her from the conversation, but General Valdez raised her hand to prevent any interference. Valdez studied Elena with the calculating attention of someone who'd spent decades evaluating personnel under pressure. "You're Lieutenant Commander Elena Reeves from the Intelligence Analysis Division," she said, and Elena realized that the general knew exactly who she was. "Your brother was Captain David Reeves, killed during the al-Rashid operation 5 years ago." Elena felt the room's attention shift as the connection between her family tragedy and the current crisis became clear to everyone present. "Yes, ma'am. David died following orders based on false intelligence. And I've spent the past 5 years developing analysis methods that could prevent similar failures. General Valdez walked slowly toward Elena, her expression revealing nothing about her thoughts or intentions. Lieutenant Commander, you're suggesting that your analytical methods are superior to the combined intelligence resources of the CIA, military intelligence, and 23 combat-proven MQ-7 pilots? Elena met the general's gaze without flinching. Ma'am, I'm suggesting that conventional intelligence methods have failed consistently for 20 years, and this operation is about to demonstrate that failure on a scale that will fundamentally alter American national security. The control center remained completely silent as General Valdez considered Elena's statement. Elena could see her weighing institutional loyalty against the possibility that a basement analyst had identified critical intelligence that everyone else had missed. Finally, Valdez spoke in a voice that carried the authority of someone who'd made countless life-and-death decisions. Show me your analysis, Lieutenant Commander. You have exactly 10 minutes to convince me that you understand Viktor Kozlov better than the entire American intelligence community. Elena opened her laptop with steady hands despite the fact that every person in the room was watching her attempt to challenge the combined wisdom of America's most senior military and intelligence leadership. The holographic displays surrounding them showed real-time feeds from the Millfield Nuclear Research Facility, where Viktor Kozlov held 17 hostages and enough weapons-grade plutonium to contaminate the eastern seaboard. In exactly 2 hours and 41 minutes, the only opportunity to prevent catastrophe would open, and Elena had 10 minutes to convince people who'd spent decades dismissing her expertise. General Valdez, Elena began, connecting her laptop to the control center's main display system. Conventional intelligence analysis treats Viktor Kozlov as an unpredictable terrorist leader whose movements can't be anticipated with reliable accuracy. This assumption has guided 20 years of failed elimination attempts and is about to cause the largest radiological disaster in American history. Elena's comprehensive analysis filled the massive wall display, replacing the tactical maps that had been showing conventional approach vectors for the Kozlov elimination. Her presentation revealed 5 years of pattern recognition work that had mapped every documented movement, communication, and operational decision made by the Revolutionary Armed Coalition leadership since their emergence as a global terrorist organization. What you're seeing is mathematical proof that Viktor Kozlov doesn't make random decisions. Elena continued, her voice gaining confidence as she revealed analysis that had never been presented to decision-makers at this level. His operational patterns follow algorithmic principles based on optimal resource allocation, psychological warfare timing, and security protocols that can be predicted with surgical precision. The display showed a complex three-dimensional model mapping Kozlov's behavior across multiple variables, facility occupation patterns, security sweep schedules, communication protocols, and psychological decision-making indicators. Elena had identified mathematical relationships that revealed Kozlov's movements weren't intuitive responses to tactical pressure. They were calculated implementations of strategic principles that he'd been using consistently for 15 years. General Valdez studied the display with the focused attention of someone who'd spent decades evaluating intelligence analysis, but Elena could see skepticism in her expression. The CIA deputy director was openly dismissive, crossing her arms and shaking her head as if watching an academic exercise that had no relevance to real-world operations. Admiral Richardson maintained a neutral expression, but his body language suggested polite attention rather than genuine interest. Lieutenant Commander, the CIA deputy director interrupted. This is exactly the kind of theoretical modeling that our human intelligence sources have consistently proven unreliable. Viktor Kozlov has evaded capture for 20 years, precisely because he doesn't follow predictable patterns that can be mapped by computer algorithms. Elena had anticipated this objection and shifted her presentation to display prediction accuracy statistics that demonstrated the superior reliability of mathematical analysis over human intelligence sources. Ma'am, my pattern recognition models have achieved 94% accuracy in predicting revolutionary armed coalition operations over the past 18 months. During that same period, human intelligence sources have achieved 23% accuracy in predicting enemy movements. She highlighted specific examples where her analysis had correctly anticipated terrorist operations, while conventional intelligence had failed completely. The Kandahar supply depot attack, the Kabul embassy bombing attempt, the Frankfurt airport infiltration. In each case, Elena's mathematical models had identified the operations weeks before they occurred, while human intelligence sources had provided either no warning or actively misleading information. More critically, Elena continued, my analysis predicted this exact scenario 6 months ago. The coordinated bombing diversions, the nuclear facility seizure, even the specific choice of Millfield as the target location, all of this was mathematically inevitable based on Kozlov's operational patterns. General Valdez leaned forward with increased attention as Elena displayed her March intelligence report titled Convergence Point Analysis, RAC Strategic Endgame Scenarios. The report had predicted not only the nuclear terrorism operation, but the specific timing, target selection, and psychological warfare objectives that were now unfolding in real time. If your analysis was so accurate, Admiral Richardson asked, why wasn't this intelligence acted upon when it was originally submitted? Elena felt a familiar frustration as she explained the institutional failures that had characterized her entire career. Sir, my report was classified as low priority, theoretical analysis, and filed without review by operational planners. The intelligence community consistently dismisses mathematical modeling in favor of human sources, even when those sources have demonstrated systematic unreliability. Major Foster stepped forward with an expression of angry disbelief. General, we're wasting critical time on academic theories when we should be conducting proven elimination procedures. This analyst has never been in combat, never conducted a drone strike, never faced the kind of split-second decisions that real warfare requires. Elena turned to address Foster directly, her voice carrying an edge of controlled anger that reflected 5 years of accumulated frustration. Major Foster, I've logged 847 hours in MQ-7 flight simulators, achieving scores that exceed your own performance records in multiple categories. I understand these aircraft better than most of the pilots who fly them professionally. The control center fell silent as Elena revealed knowledge that no one had known she possessed. Foster's face reddened with embarrassment and anger as he realized that his dismissive treatment of Elena had been based on assumptions about her capabilities rather than actual knowledge of her qualifications. Elena shifted her presentation to display real-time analysis of the nuclear facility that revealed critical intelligence everyone else had missed. General, conventional analysis assumes that Kozlov is using the main laboratory as his command center because that's where our surveillance has detected the most activity. But mathematical analysis of his communication patterns shows that this is deliberate misdirection designed to provoke exactly the kind of airstrikes that would trigger radiological contamination. Her display showed communication intercept analysis proving that Kozlov's real command center was located in the facility's administrative building, while the main laboratory had been rigged with radiological dispersal devices that would activate if struck by American missiles. The CIA's human intelligence sources had been providing information designed to ensure that American forces would target the laboratory, triggering the very catastrophe Kozlov wanted to create. But more importantly, Elena continued, highlighting the critical information that could save the mission. Kozlov conducts personal security sweeps at precisely 4-hour intervals, following mathematical optimization principles that balance security with operational efficiency. In exactly 2 hours and 31 minutes, he will begin a 47-minute security sweep that takes him to the Eastern Observation Tower, completely isolated from hostages, radiological materials, and communications equipment. Elena's analysis showed the exact route Kozlov would follow, the precise timing of each phase of his security sweep, and the optimal targeting coordinates for a precision strike that would eliminate him without triggering any of the catastrophic outcomes he'd engineered. The mathematical certainty of her predictions was supported by 5 years of data showing that Kozlov had never deviated from these security protocols. Even during the most intense tactical pressure, General Valdez studied the analysis with growing recognition that Elena had identified intelligence capabilities that the entire American intelligence community had overlooked. Lieutenant Commander, you're claiming that you can predict Kozlov's exact location with precision sufficient for surgical elimination. Yes, ma'am, Elena replied with absolute confidence. At 1847 hours, Viktor Kozlov will enter the Eastern Observation Tower for a 47-minute security sweep. During that time, he will be accompanied by exactly 2 bodyguards, carrying minimal communications equipment, and positioned in a reinforced concrete structure that's isolated from all potential collateral damage targets. Elena highlighted the targeting parameters that would ensure successful elimination. Approach vector from the southeast to avoid detection by facility air defenses. Targeting window between minutes 12 and 34 of the security sweep when Kozlov would be positioned in the tower's observation deck, and weapons selection optimized for penetrating reinforced concrete while minimizing blast radius. This is our only opportunity, Elena said, her voice carrying the urgency of someone who understood. The countdown timer running in everyone's mind. If we miss this window, Kozlov will return to the main facility where any targeting attempt will trigger radiological dispersal, devices that could contaminate hundreds of square miles. The CIA deputy director shook her head dismissively. General, this is exactly the kind of overconfident analysis that leads to intelligence failures. No mathematical model can predict human behavior with the precision this analyst is claiming. Elena had prepared for this challenge and shifted her display to show real-time validation of her predictive capabilities. Ma'am, my models correctly predicted that Kozlov would initiate facility lockdown procedures at 1347 hours, begin psychological warfare communications at 1420 hours, and establish defensive positions in the administrative building by 1500 hours. All of these predictions have been confirmed by current surveillance. General Valdez looked around the control center at the faces of pilots, intelligence officers, and military leadership who'd spent decades conducting counter-terrorism operations, using methods that had failed consistently for 20 years. Elena could see her weighing institutional loyalty against the mathematical certainty of analysis that offered the only viable path to mission success. Colonel Harrison, Valdez said slowly, what's your assessment of Lieutenant Commander Reeves' analysis? Harrison glanced at the pilots who'd been selected for the mission, then at the intelligence displays, showing Elena's comprehensive understanding of both the enemy and the weapon systems needed to eliminate him. General, her technical knowledge appears to be exceptional, but operational command requires combat experience that simulation training can't replicate. Elena realized that the final decision would be based not on the accuracy of her analysis or the superiority of her approach, but on institutional assumptions about who was qualified to conduct the most critical military operation in decades. She looked directly at General Valdez and spoke with the quiet certainty of someone who'd spent 5 years preparing for exactly this moment. Ma'am, I formally request authorization to conduct this elimination as primary pilot for MQ-7 designation. Reaper 7, I have the intelligence, the technical skills, and the mathematical certainty necessary to prevent radiological catastrophe and eliminate America's most wanted terrorist. The countdown timer in Elena's mind showed exactly 2 hours and 23 minutes until the elimination window opened. General Valdez stared at Elena for what felt like an eternity, the weight of national security hanging in the silence between them. The control center's holographic displays continued updating with real-time intelligence from the nuclear facility, showing Kozlov's defensive preparations proceeding exactly as Elena's mathematical models had predicted. Every passing second brought them closer to either the most successful counter-terrorism operation in American history or the largest radiological disaster on the North American continent. "Lieutenant Commander Reeves," Valdez said slowly, her voice carrying the careful precision of someone about to make a decision that would be analyzed by historians for decades. "You're asking me to authorize the most critical drone elimination in our military history to be conducted by an analyst who has never flown a combat mission." Elena stood perfectly still, her laptop still connected to the main display, showing the mathematical certainty of her approach contrasted against the conventional tactical plans that would fail catastrophically. Around her, she could feel the hostility radiating from pilots who'd spent years earning their positions through combat experience, only to watch a basement analyst claim superior qualifications for the mission that would define their careers. "Ma'am," Elena replied, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system, "I'm asking you to authorize the elimination to be conducted by the person who understands both the target and the weapon system better than anyone else. In this room, combat experience means nothing if it's based on fundamental misunderstanding of enemy behavior." Major Foster stepped forward with barely controlled anger, his face red with the humiliation of having his simulator scores revealed as inferior to those of a support analyst. "General, this is insane. She's never faced enemy fire, never made life and death decisions under pressure, never dealt with the psychological stress of killing another human being. Simulation scores don't mean anything when real lives are at stake." Elena turned to face Foster directly, her patience finally exhausted after 5 years of watching qualified people make catastrophic mistakes because they couldn't accept expertise from unconventional sources. "Major Foster, your last 3 elimination attempts resulted in mission failures because you didn't understand enemy movement patterns. My analysis could have prevented those failures, but you dismissed my intelligence as theoretical speculation from basement personnel." The accusation hung in the air like an accusation of professional incompetence, which is exactly what Elena intended. Foster's mission failures had been attributed to insufficient intelligence rather than pilot error, but Elena's records showed that accurate intelligence had been available and ignored in each case. Admiral Richardson stepped forward to diffuse the growing confrontation between Elena and the pilot squadron. "Lieutenant Commander, even if your analysis is accurate, conducting drone eliminations requires more than technical knowledge. It requires psychological preparation for taking human life, tactical awareness of combat environments, and decision-making capabilities under extreme pressure." Elena had anticipated this objection and was prepared with an answer that would expose the fundamental flaw in conventional military thinking. "Sir, with respect, the psychological barriers you're describing are exactly what cause operational failures. Hesitation, emotional decision-making, and conventional tactical thinking are why Viktor Kozlov has evaded elimination for 20 years. She shifted her laptop display to show psychological analysis of successful versus failed elimination attempts, revealing patterns that conventional military training had never addressed. Mathematical analysis eliminates emotional variables that interfere with optimal decision-making. My approach is based on algorithmic precision rather than instinctive responses that can be manipulated by enemy. Psychological warfare, General. Valdez studied Elena's psychological analysis with growing recognition that she'd identified capabilities that went far beyond conventional pilot training. Elena had developed methods for conducting eliminations that treated combat operations as mathematical problems rather than emotional challenges. potentially eliminating the very psychological factors that had caused previous mission failures. The CIA Deputy Director made one final attempt to discredit Elena's approach. "General, this analyst is asking you to gamble American national security on untested theories developed by someone with no operational experience. Our human intelligence. Sources have provided reliable information about Kozlov's location and intentions." Elena's response was immediate and devastating. "Ma'am, your reliable human intelligence sources provided the same kind of false information that led to the Al-Rashid civilian casualties 5 years ago. My brother died following orders based on CIA intelligence that was either compromised or deliberately fabricated. Those same intelligence failures are being repeated right now." The accusation created visible tension throughout the control center as Elena directly challenged the CIA's credibility in front of the highest levels of military leadership. But Elena had documentation to support her claims, and everyone present knew that the Al-Rashid incident had been one of the most significant intelligence failures in recent American military history. General Valdez looked around the control center at the faces of people who'd spent decades implementing counterterrorism strategies that had failed consistently for 20 years. Elena could see her weighing institutional loyalty against mathematical evidence that conventional approaches were fundamentally flawed. "Colonel Harrison," Valdez said, "what's the current operational timeline for conventional elimination procedures?" Harrison consulted his tactical displays, showing the standard approach that had been developed by the pilot squadron. "General, we're planning to establish persistent surveillance beginning in 4 hours, followed by target acquisition and elimination when Kozlov exposes himself during routine facility operations. We estimate a 12-hour window for successful completion." Elena stepped forward with information that would destroy the conventional plan's credibility. "General, that timeline completely misses the optimal elimination window and gives Kozlov multiple opportunities to trigger his radiological device. Mathematical analysis shows that conventional surveillance will alert him to American intentions, causing him to accelerate his timeline for detonating nuclear materials." She highlighted the critical flaw in conventional thinking, the assumption that extended surveillance would provide better targeting opportunities when it actually telegraphed American intentions to an enemy who'd been anticipating exactly this type of response for months. "Moreover," Elena continued, "the 12-hour operational window extends far beyond Kozlov's planned detonation schedule. My analysis indicates he intends to trigger his device in exactly 4 hours and 15 minutes, regardless of American tactical responses. Conventional procedures will arrive too late to prevent radiological catastrophe." General Valdez studied the countdown timeline, showing the convergence between Kozlov's detonation schedule and the optimal elimination window that Elena had identified. The mathematical precision of Elena's analysis stood in stark contrast to the vague estimates and assumptions that characterized conventional military planning. "Lieutenant Commander," Valdez said, "you're claiming that conventional military procedures will not only fail to eliminate the target, but will actually ensure that he successfully detonates his radiological device?" "Yes, ma'am," Elena replied without hesitation. "Conventional approaches are based on tactical assumptions that Kozlov has been exploiting for 2 decades. He's engineered this entire scenario to take advantage of predictable American responses that prioritize caution over precision." Elena's analysis showed that Kozlov's psychological warfare strategy depended on American forces following exactly the conventional procedures that the pilot squadron had developed. Extended surveillance would give him time to relocate closer to radiological materials. Gradual escalation would allow him to trigger dispersal devices before elimination attempts. Conventional targeting would focus on obvious locations that had been prepared as traps. The CIA Deputy Director made a final appeal to institutional authority. "General, This analysis contradicts decades of proven counterterrorism methodology. We cannot abandon established procedures based on theoretical models developed by a single analyst. Elena's response carried the quiet confidence of someone who'd spent 5 years preparing for exactly this moment. Ma'am, those proven counterterrorism methodologies have failed to eliminate Viktor Kozlov for 20 years, failed to prevent this nuclear crisis, and are about to fail again on a scale that will fundamentally alter American national security. General Valdez walked slowly to the Central Command Station, studying the real-time intelligence feeds that showed Kozlov's preparations proceeding exactly as Elena's models had predicted. Elena could see her processing the mathematical certainty of algorithmic analysis against the institutional resistance to unconventional approaches. Finally, Valdez turned back to face the assembled officers with an expression that revealed her decision. Colonel Harrison, you will provide Lieutenant Commander Reeves with full access to MQ-7 Reaper 7 and all associated support systems. She will conduct the Kozlov elimination as primary pilot, with your squadron providing backup support as directed. The control center erupted in shocked protests from pilots who couldn't accept that their most critical mission had been assigned to a basement analyst. Major Foster's voice rose above the others. General, this is completely unprecedented. You cannot authorize an unqualified analyst to conduct combat operations. General Valdez silenced the protests with a look that reminded everyone present why she commanded Special Operations Division. Major Foster, Lieutenant Commander Reeves has demonstrated superior understanding of both the target and the weapon systems required for this mission. Her qualifications exceed those of anyone else in this room. Elena felt a surge of vindication that was immediately tempered by the weight of responsibility she'd just accepted. In exactly 2 hours and 14 minutes, the elimination window would open, and she would either prevent the largest terrorist attack in American history or fail in the most public way imaginable. General, Valdez approached Elena with an expression that combined respect with the gravity of command decision. Lieutenant Commander, you have authorization to conduct this elimination using any methods you deem necessary. The success of this mission now depends entirely on the accuracy of your analysis and the precision of your execution. Elena straightened to attention and saluted with the crisp precision of someone who'd finally been given the opportunity to prove what she'd always known she could accomplish. Ma'am, I will not fail. Viktor Kozlov will be eliminated and American lives will be protected. As Elena walked toward MQ-7 Reaper 7's control station, she could feel every person in the room watching her take command of the most advanced weapon system in the American military arsenal. The pilots who dismissed her expertise for 5 years were now watching her prepare to conduct the mission that would define the future of American counterterrorism operations. Elena took her position at the pilot station that had always been forbidden to people like her, placed her hands on controls she'd mastered through 847 hours of simulation training, and began the pre-flight sequence that would either vindicate 20 years of dismissed expertise or destroy her career in the most spectacular failure in military history. The MQ-7 Reaper 7 control station responded to Elena's touch like an instrument. She'd been born to play. Her fingers moved across the holographic interface with the fluid precision of 847 hours of simulation training, initializing systems that most analysts had never been authorized to access. The massive displays surrounding her workstation came alive with real-time feeds from the drone sensors, showing crystal-clear imagery of the Millfield Nuclear Research Facility from an altitude of 35,000 feet. Elena could feel every person in the control center watching her conduct pre-flight procedures with the quiet efficiency of someone who understood these systems better than the pilots who'd operated them for years. The skepticism and hostility that had defined their attitude toward her was gradually being replaced by recognition that her technical competence exceeded anything they'd anticipated from a basement analyst. Reaper 7 systems nominal, Elena announced, her voice carrying across the silent control center with the calm professionalism of someone conducting routine operations rather than the most critical elimination in American military history. Satellite uplink established, weapons systems armed, target acquisition sensors online. The countdown timer in Elena's mind showed exactly 1 hour and 47 minutes until Viktor Kozlov would begin his security sweep, creating the 47-minute window for surgical elimination that would prevent radiological catastrophe. Elena's mathematical models indicated that Kozlov was currently conducting final preparations in the facility's administrative building. Following behavioral patterns that had remained consistent for 15 years, General Valdez positioned herself directly behind Elena's workstation, close enough to monitor every decision without interfering with operational procedures. Elena could sense the weight of command authority that came with Valdez's presence, but she'd stopped being intimidated by rank and hierarchy. For the next 2 hours, Elena's expertise would determine whether thousands of Americans lived or died. "Lieutenant." "Commander," Valdez said quietly, "walk me through your operational approach." Elena's displays shifted to show comprehensive analysis of Kozlov's facility layout, security protocols, and the precise timing required for successful elimination. "General, Kozlov will initiate his security sweep in 1 hour and 46 minutes, following a route that takes him from the administrative building to the Eastern Observation Tower. The optimal targeting window opens at minute 12 of his sweep and closes at minute 34. She highlighted the mathematical precision that conventional military planning had never achieved. During this 22-minute window, Kozlov will be positioned in the tower's observation deck, isolated from hostages and radiological materials, accompanied by exactly 2 bodyguards. The tower's reinforced concrete construction will contain blast effects, preventing collateral damage to surrounding structures. Elena's analysis showed targeting parameters that required surgical precision. Approach vector from bearing 127 degrees to avoid facility air defenses. Altitude maintenance at 34,000 feet to prevent acoustic detection. And weapon selection optimized for penetrating reinforced concrete while minimizing blast radius. Major Foster, despite his earlier protests, had positioned himself at a monitoring station where he could observe Elena's operational procedures. Elena could see him studying her targeting analysis with grudging recognition that her mathematical approach achieved precision that conventional pilot training had never addressed. "Reeves," Foster said, his voice lacking the earlier hostility, "how certain are you about this timing window?" Elena turned to face the pilot who dismissed her expertise for 5 years. "Major Foster, mathematical certainty. Kozlov has conducted security sweeps at 4-hour intervals for the past 847 documented operations, following algorithms that optimize security while maintaining operational efficiency. He has never deviated from these patterns, even under extreme tactical pressure." The precision of Elena's answer reflected 5 years of comprehensive analysis that had mapped every aspect of Kozlov's behavioral patterns. Foster nodded slowly, recognizing that Elena's understanding of the target exceeded anything achieved through conventional intelligence methods. Elena's displays showed real-time updates as Kozlov's preparations proceeded exactly according to her predictive models. At 16:23 hours, he initiated facility lockdown procedures. At 16:34 hours, he began psychological warfare communications with American negotiators. At 16:45 hours, he established defensive positions in the administrative building. Every action confirmed the mathematical accuracy of Elena's behavioral analysis. "Target behavioral patterns consistent with mathematical models," Elena announced, her confidence growing as real-world events validated 5 years of theoretical analysis. "Elimination window will open as predicted." Elena began the approach sequence that would position Reaper 7 for optimal targeting when Kozlov entered the elimination window. The drone's flight path had been calculated to avoid detection by facility air defenses while maintaining perfect positioning for surgical strikes. Elena's mathematical approach eliminated the guesswork and estimation that characterized conventional targeting procedures. As the countdown timer approached 1 hour and 12 minutes, Elena could see Kozlov beginning preliminary movements that indicated the start of the security sweep. Her analysis showed him conducting final communications with subordinates, reviewing facility status reports, and preparing for the personal inspection tour that would take him to the Eastern Observation Tower. "General," Elena said, her voice carrying the quiet certainty of someone watching mathematical predictions become reality. "Target is beginning security sweep initiation procedures. Elimination window will open in exactly 11 minutes and 33 seconds. General Valdez studied Elena's displays showing Kozlov's real-time movements overlaid with mathematical predictions that had proven accurate to the minute. The precision of Elena's analysis exceeded anything achieved by conventional intelligence methods, demonstrating capabilities that the American military had been systematically ignoring for decades. Elena's weapons systems displays showed Hellfire missile selection optimized for the specific targeting requirements of this elimination. Penetration capability sufficient. General Valdez walked slowly to the central command station, studying the real-time intelligence feeds that showed Kozlov's preparations proceeding exactly as Elena's models had predicted. Elena could see her processing the mathematical certainty. At exactly 1847 hours, Viktor Kozlov emerged from the administrative building and began walking toward the Eastern Observation Tower, following the route that Elena's mathematical models had predicted with surgical precision. Elena watched the most wanted terrorist in the world proceed directly into the elimination window she'd identified through 5 years of pattern analysis. "Target entering elimination zone," Elena announced, her voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment. Weapons systems locked, targeting parameters confirmed, elimination authorized. Elena's finger moved to the weapon release control as Kozlov climbed the stairs to the observation deck, positioning himself exactly where mathematical analysis had predicted he would be. The moment represented vindication not just for Elena's analytical methods, but for every analyst whose expertise had been dismissed by people who confused authority with competence. "Target acquired," Elena said, watching Kozlov position himself in the observation deck center, isolated from hostages and radiological materials, exactly as predicted. Initiating elimination sequence. The Hellfire missile launched from Reaper 7 with the whisper-quiet precision of German engineering, its trajectory calculated to deliver surgical destruction to coordinates that Elena had identified through mathematical analysis. Elena watched the weapon's flight path on her displays, knowing that successful elimination would prevent radiological catastrophe while demonstrating the superiority of analytical warfare over conventional military approaches. 47 seconds later, the Eastern Observation Tower erupted in a controlled explosion that eliminated Viktor Kozlov and his 2 bodyguards, while leaving the rest of the facility completely undamaged. Elena's mathematical precision had achieved what 20 years of conventional counterterrorism operations had failed to accomplish. "Target eliminated," Elena announced to the silent control center. "Threat neutralized. Mission accomplished." The control center erupted in applause that Elena had never expected to hear. General Valdez stepped forward with an expression that combined professional respect with recognition of exceptional achievement under pressure. "Outstanding work, Major Reeves," Valdez said, and Elena realized that her successful elimination had just earned her an immediate promotion that reflected her demonstrated capabilities rather than institutional hierarchy. Elena stood from the pilot station that had transformed her from dismissed analyst to decorated officer in the span of 2 hours. Around her, the pilots who'd questioned her qualifications were now studying her targeting procedures with the recognition that mathematical warfare represented the future of precision military operations. 6 hours later, Elena stood in General Valdez's office at the Pentagon, wearing the silver oak leaves of her new major's rank and holding orders that would fundamentally change her role in the American military. The successful elimination of Viktor Kozlov had not only prevented radiological catastrophe, but had demonstrated analytical capabilities that military leadership wanted to expand throughout the drone warfare program. Major Reeves, Valdez said, handing Elena a classified document that outlined her new responsibilities. "You're being appointed as Director of Mathematical Warfare Analysis, with authority to develop prediction algorithms for the entire Special Operations Division. Your methods will be integrated into pilot training programs, intelligence analysis procedures, and strategic planning operations." Elena accepted the position that represented everything she'd worked toward for the past 5 years. But more importantly, she'd proven that expertise could triumph over institutional prejudice when national security demanded the best rather than the most conventional approach. 3 weeks later, Elena received a letter from President Harrison personally thanking her for preventing what intelligence estimates suggested would have been the largest terrorist attack in American history. The letter was accompanied by the Presidential Medal of Freedom, recognizing her contribution to national security through analytical innovation that had saved thousands of American lives. Elena kept the medal on her desk next to the photograph of her brother David, knowing that his sacrifice had motivated her to develop the capabilities that ultimately prevented others from experiencing similar tragedies. The system that had failed David had been fundamentally transformed by Elena's demonstration that mathematical precision could achieve what conventional approaches had failed to accomplish for decades. The basement analytics wing was relocated to a state-of-the-art facility on the Pentagon's 3rd floor, with Elena leading a team of analysts whose mathematical models now guided the most critical military operations worldwide. The dismissive nickname, "better at counting than killing," had been replaced with recognition that counting, when done with mathematical precision, was exactly what modern warfare required. Elena had proven that sometimes the most qualified person isn't the one with the most conventional credentials, but the one with the knowledge and courage to challenge systems that prioritize conformity over competence. Her success had opened doors for countless other analysts whose expertise had been systematically ignored by people who confused tradition with effectiveness. Looking back, Elena realized that her brother's death had been the catalyst for discoveries that would prevent similar tragedies for generations of American service members. Mathematical warfare had become the standard for precision military operations, ensuring that future conflicts would be decided by analytical superiority rather than conventional approaches that had failed consistently for decades. The war against the Revolutionary Armed Coalition officially ended with Kozlov's elimination, as the organization fragmented without its strategic leadership. Elena's mathematical models had not only prevented radiological catastrophe, but had eliminated the terrorist threat that had defined American foreign policy for 20 years. Elena had transformed from invisible analyst to decorated officer, proving that expertise combined with courage could overcome any institutional barrier when lives depended on exceptional performance rather than conventional wisdom. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.